I remember building snow forts with my little sister Madison in our backyard in Columbus, Ohio, when we were kids. She would always insist on making hers bigger than mine, and I would help her, because that is what big sisters do. Now, 20 years later, I am sitting in my corner office at my successful marketing firm, staring at 17 missed calls and 12 voicemails from my parents. The same people who chose to believe I stole our grandmother's inheritance are now begging me to save them from losing their house. Before I tell you how I watched my family crumble while I built my empire, let me know in the comments where you are watching from, and do not forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more family drama stories. Trust me, you will not believe what my sister did to destroy our entire family. Growing up as the older sister in our middle-class family meant I was always the responsible one. Dad worked construction, putting in long hours, building homes across Columbus, while Mom worked as a school secretary at the local elementary. Madison was 3 years younger than me, with blonde curls and bright green eyes that could charm anyone into giving her exactly what she wanted. I was the one with straight brown hair, pulled back in practical ponytails, focused on my studies and planning for the future. From elementary school through high school, I maintained perfect grades, while Madison coasted by with C's and D's, spending most of her time drawing and painting. Our parents always said she was the creative one, while I was their little achiever. I earned a full scholarship to Ohio State University for business, something that made Dad beam with pride every time he told his coworkers about his daughter, who was going to be the first in the family to graduate college. When I was 20 and Madison was 17, our grandmother Eleanor moved in with us. Grandma had been living alone since Grandpa passed away 5 years earlier, but her arthritis was getting worse, and she needed more help with daily tasks. She was 76 then, with silver hair she kept in perfect curls and a sharp mind that could remember every detail of our family history going back 4 generations. Grandma Eleanor had a routine that never changed. Every Tuesday morning, she would ask me to drive her to the First National Bank downtown, where she had kept her accounts for over 50 years. We would go through the drive-through, and she would make her weekly deposit from her Social Security check, always keeping exactly $200 in cash for her personal expenses. She would count those bills 3 times before folding them neatly into her black leather wallet. During those car rides, Grandma would talk about her dreams of opening a small business when she was younger. She had wanted to run a bakery, she told me, but women did not have those opportunities back in the 1940s. She would look at me with such pride when I talked about my business classes and my plans to start my own marketing company someday. Madison never showed interest in these conversations, preferring to stay home and work on her art projects. 2 years later, on a cold February morning, during my senior year at Ohio State, Mom called me at 6:30 in the morning. Grandma Eleanor had suffered a massive heart attack in her sleep and passed away peacefully at 78. The funeral was small but beautiful, filled with neighbors and family friends who remembered her kindness and generous spirit. We all thought we knew everything about Grandma Eleanor until the lawyer called us to his office the following week for the reading of her will. The law office was downtown in a building that smelled like old books and furniture polish. Mr. Patterson, Grandma's attorney for over 30 years, had us all sit around his mahogany conference table. Mom and Dad sat together, holding hands nervously. Madison fidgeted in her chair, clearly wanting to be anywhere else but there. I sat quietly expecting to hear about small mementos and family jewelry being distributed among us. What we heard instead shocked everyone in that room. After leaving specific items to various family members, Mr. Patterson cleared his throat and read the final provision of the will. Grandma Eleanor had left $50,000 specifically to me, with a note that said it was for my business dreams and that she knew I would use it wisely. The room fell completely silent for what felt like an eternity. Dad was the first to speak, his voice filled with pride, but also concern. He worried about fairness between his daughters, wondering if Madison might feel hurt by the decision. Mom reached over and squeezed my hand, tears in her eyes, as she said Grandma always believed in my entrepreneurial spirit. Madison sat staring at the table, her face unreadable, not saying a word during the entire rest of the meeting. That evening, I found Madison in her room, surrounded by her paintings and sketches. I sat on her bed and told her honestly that I had no idea Grandma was planning to leave me any money and that I would be happy to share it with her. We could each use $25,000 to pursue our dreams. She looked up at me with those green eyes and smiled, saying she appreciated the offer, but that Grandma obviously wanted me to have it for my business plans. She seemed genuinely okay with the situation, even giving me a hug before I left her room. Over the next few weeks, I used the money exactly as Grandma intended. I applied to several graduate business programs, attended networking events, and began seriously researching what it would take to start my own marketing firm after graduation. Madison seemed supportive, often asking questions about my plans and offering to design logos or promotional materials when I was ready to launch my company. But something started feeling different at home. Madison began making subtle comments about how some people just get lucky in life while others have to struggle for everything. She dropped out of art school that spring, claiming she needed to figure out what she really wanted to do with her life. She moved back into her old bedroom and spent most days sleeping until noon and watching television. Mom and Dad started asking me pointed questions about how I was managing the inheritance money, whether I was being responsible with it, and if I had considered that maybe Grandma was not thinking clearly when she made those financial decisions. The questions felt strange coming from parents who had always trusted my judgment completely. I kept detailed records of every dollar I spent, thinking transparency would ease their growing concerns. Madison began asking odd questions about where I kept my important documents, whether I had put the money in a special account, and if I had talked to anyone at the bank about Grandma's final visits there. At the time, I thought she was just curious about financial planning, maybe thinking about her own future. I never suspected she was gathering information for something much more sinister. The day that changed everything started like any other Tuesday in April. I was at my internship at a small marketing firm in downtown Columbus, learning everything I could about client relations and campaign development. I came home that evening, excited to tell my family about a successful presentation I had given to potential clients. Instead, I found my suitcases and boxes packed neatly on the front porch with a note taped to the front door telling me not to come inside. I stood on that porch for 20 minutes, reading and rereading that note, unable to process what was happening. When I finally gathered the courage to knock on the door, Dad opened it just wide enough to speak through the crack. His face was red with anger and disappointment as he told me that Madison had confessed everything about how I had manipulated Grandma Eleanor into changing her will while she was on medication for her arthritis pain. Before I could say a single word in my defense, Dad closed the door. I heard the deadbolt click into place, and I knew my life as I had known it was over. Standing on that porch with my belongings scattered around me, I felt like I was living in someone else's nightmare. I called Mom's cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail. I tried Dad's number with the same result. Even Madison's phone was turned off. I loaded everything I owned into my beat-up Honda Civic and drove to the cheapest motel I could find on the outskirts of town. The Sunrise Inn was exactly as depressing as it sounds, with faded orange carpeting and the smell of cigarettes permanently embedded in every surface. I paid for 1 week with money from my part-time job, hoping that would be enough time for this horrible misunderstanding to get resolved. I spent that first night calling every family member I could think of, but apparently Madison had been busy sharing her version of events with everyone. My Aunt Susan, Mom's sister, was the only one who would even speak to me on the phone. She told me through tears that Madison had shown her what appeared to be notes in my handwriting, detailing plans to convince Grandma to leave me money. The notes talked about Grandma being confused from her pain medications and how easy it would be to influence her decisions during our weekly bank trips. Susan said she wanted to believe me, but the evidence seemed overwhelming. I begged Susan to listen to my side of the story, explaining that I had never written any such notes and that Grandma had always been mentally sharp right up until her death. But Susan said the family had already discussed it and decided it would be best if I stayed away until I was ready to admit what I had done and make things right with Madison. The phone call ended with her crying and me sitting alone in that terrible motel room, realizing that everyone I loved had already chosen to believe a lie. The next few months were the darkest period of my entire life. Without my parents' financial information, I could not complete my financial aid paperwork for my final semester. I had to take out emergency loans at extremely high interest rates just to finish my degree. I worked 3 part-time jobs, that spring cleaning offices at night, serving tables on weekends, and filing paperwork for a law firm during the day between classes. I sent letters home every week explaining the truth about what had happened and begging my family to reconsider their decision. Every single letter came back, marked return to sender unopened. I sent birthday cards that were also returned. I even tried showing up at Dad's construction sites, but his co-workers had been told to call the police if I appeared. My own family had turned me into a stranger, someone to be feared and avoided. Graduation day arrived without any fanfare. I sat alone in that huge auditorium, watching other students celebrate with their families, taking pictures and making plans for the future. When they called my name to receive my diploma, I walked across that stage with my head held high, but inside, I felt completely hollow. I had achieved something no one else in my family had ever accomplished, and there was nobody there who cared. After graduation, I made the decision to leave Ohio entirely. There was nothing keeping me in Columbus except painful memories and a family who would never forgive me for something I had not done. I packed my Honda Civic with everything I owned and drove to Chicago, a city big enough for someone to disappear and start over completely. Finding a job in Chicago was not easy, with no local connections and limited work experience, but I eventually landed an entry-level position at a small marketing firm in the Loop. The salary was barely enough to afford a studio apartment in a questionable neighborhood, but it was mine, and nobody there knew anything about my family situation. I could reinvent myself as just another ambitious young professional trying to make it in the big city. I threw myself into work with an intensity that probably worried my coworkers. I volunteered for every project, stayed late every night, and spent weekends studying industry trends and learning new software programs. I had no social life, no dating prospects, and no close friends. Work became my entire world because it was the only place where I felt like I had any value or purpose. While I was building my career from nothing, I occasionally heard updates about my family through mutual acquaintances from Columbus. Madison had supposedly gotten clean from whatever substances she had been using, but she kept having relapses that required expensive treatment programs. Mom and Dad had dipped into their retirement savings multiple times to pay for private rehabilitation facilities and therapy sessions. What I learned much later was that Madison's problems had started long before she accused me of manipulating Grandma Eleanor. She had been experimenting with prescription pills during her senior year of high school, stealing them from medicine cabinets at parties and buying them from classmates. By the time she dropped out of art school, she was already addicted to painkillers and had started using her inheritance accusation as a way to deflect attention from her own problems. The boyfriend she brought home that summer was bad news from the beginning. Tyler was 25 years old, with a criminal record for theft and drug possession, but Madison claimed he was helping her stay clean. In reality, he was feeding her addiction and draining what little money she had left. When Madison's money ran out, Tyler convinced her to start taking things from Mom and Dad's house to sell for drug money. Over the next 3 years, Madison and Tyler stole thousands of dollars worth of items from my parents' home. They took jewelry, electronics tools from Dad's workshop, and even Mom's grandmother's china set. Each time something went missing, Madison would tearfully explain that she needed money for food or rent, and my parents would believe her because they wanted so desperately for her recovery to be real. Dad's construction business began suffering as he became more distracted by family problems. He started drinking after work, something he had never done before, and his reputation in the industry began to decline. Mom developed stress-related health problems, including diabetes and high blood pressure that required expensive medications. Their insurance premiums skyrocketed as their health declined. By the time I had been working in Chicago for 5 years, I had been promoted 3 times and was earning more money than my father ever had in construction. I was 27 years old, living in a nice apartment in Lincoln Park, and finally feeling like I had built something meaningful with my life. I had also been seeing a therapist who helped me understand that my family's betrayal said more about them than it did about me. That was when I made the decision to start my own marketing firm. I had saved every penny I could for 5 years, lived far below my means, and built an impressive client list through my work at the agency. I rented a small office space, hired 2 junior employees, and officially launched Rosanna Marketing Solutions on my 28th birthday. The irony was not lost on me that I was using Grandma Eleanor's inheritance money, which I had never touched, as my startup funding. My business grew steadily over the next few years as I focused on serving small and medium-sized companies who needed personal attention and creative solutions. I reinvested every profit back into the company, hiring talented employees and upgrading our technology. By the time I turned 32, we had 15 employees and a client roster that included some of Chicago's most successful businesses. I had also started dating someone for the first time since leaving Ohio. Marcus was a fellow entrepreneur who had started his own software development company, and he understood the demands of building a business from scratch. We met at a networking event and bonded over stories of long work hours and the satisfaction of seeing your own ideas come to life. He was patient with my trust issues and never pushed me to share more about my family situation than I was comfortable with. Meanwhile, my parents' situation in Columbus was deteriorating rapidly. Through a mutual acquaintance who still lived there, I learned that Dad's drinking had cost him several major construction contracts. His reputation was damaged beyond repair, and he was struggling to find steady work. Mom had been forced to take early retirement when her diabetes complications made it impossible for her to maintain her demanding schedule at the school. Madison had been in and out of rehabilitation programs 6 times over the past 8 years. Each program cost thousands of dollars that my parents did not have, forcing them to remortgage their house repeatedly. The home that had been paid off when I was in college now carried a mortgage larger than its current market value. Tyler had eventually been arrested for drug dealing, but Madison had already moved on to another boyfriend with similar problems. The most painful part of watching my family's destruction from a distance was knowing that it could have been prevented. If my parents had chosen to believe me instead of Madison's lies, they would have seen her real problems and gotten her proper help years earlier. Instead, they had enabled her addiction and criminal behavior while punishing me for a crime I had never committed. In January of my 33rd year, I received the first communication from my family in over a decade. It was a voicemail from Mom, and her voice sounded so much older and more fragile than I remembered. She did not apologize or acknowledge what had happened between us. Instead, she simply explained that they were facing some financial difficulties and wondered if I might be able to help them out temporarily. The voicemail was followed by several more over the next few weeks, each one more desperate than the last. Dad finally called and left a message that was clearly difficult for him to record. His voice was shaky and slurred, and he stumbled over words as he tried to explain their situation without admitting any wrongdoing on their part. They had 30 days to come up with $40,000, or they would lose the house. I hired a private investigator to verify their claims and to get a complete picture of what had happened to my family over the past decade. What I learned was both heartbreaking and infuriating. The investigator documented every theft Madison had committed, every lie she had told, and every time my parents had chosen to enable her behavior rather than face the truth about their younger daughter. The investigator also uncovered something that changed everything for me. Hidden in Madison's belongings during one of her many moves back home, my parents had found a detailed written confession about forging the notes that had destroyed my life. Madison had written about her jealousy over Grandma's inheritance, her growing drug problem, and her decision to frame me rather than take responsibility for her own actions. The most devastating part of the confession was Madison's admission that she had shown the forged notes to our parents, expecting them to ask me about it and give me a chance to defend myself. She had never intended for them to pack my belongings and throw me out without a conversation. When they reacted so extremely, Madison had been too scared and too high to tell them the truth, so she had just let the lie continue growing until it consumed our entire family. My parents had been living with this confession for over 2 years, according to the investigator's timeline. They knew I was innocent. They knew Madison had destroyed our family with her lies, but they had been too ashamed and too proud to reach out and apologize. It was only now, facing homelessness, that they were swallowing their pride and asking for my help. When I learned about the confession, I felt a mix of vindication and rage that was almost overwhelming. For over 10 years, I had carried the pain of my family's betrayal, wondering if maybe I had somehow given them reason to doubt me. Now I knew that they had proof of my innocence and had chosen to let me suffer rather than admit they had been wrong. I decided that I needed to see them face to face before making any decision about helping with their financial crisis. I drove to Columbus on a Saturday morning, something I had not done in over a decade. The house where I grew up looked smaller and shabbier than I remembered, with peeling paint and an overgrown yard that showed years of neglect. When Mom answered the door, I barely recognized her. She had aged 20 years in the decade since I had seen her with gray hair and deep lines around her eyes. She started crying the moment she saw me reaching out, as if to hug me, but I stepped back and asked if we could sit down and talk. Dad appeared behind her, looking equally aged and worn down by years of stress and alcohol. We sat in their living room, which was nearly empty of furniture and belongings. They had sold almost everything of value to pay for Madison's various treatment programs and legal fees. The walls that had once been covered with family photos now held only faded rectangles where the pictures used to hang. For the first hour, my parents talked around the real issues, focusing on their current financial crisis and their fear of becoming homeless. They mentioned Madison's ongoing problems, but still spoke about her as if she were the victim of circumstances rather than the architect of our family's destruction. They seemed to expect that I would immediately offer to solve their problems simply because we were related. When I asked them directly about the confession Madison had written, the room fell into complete silence. Dad looked at the floor, while Mom started crying harder than before. Finally, Dad admitted that they had known the truth about what Madison had done to me, but they had not known how to fix such a terrible mistake after so many years had passed. I looked at these two people who had raised me, who had taught me right from wrong, who had thrown me away based on the lies of their golden child, and I felt absolutely nothing. The love I had felt for them had died years ago, killed by their betrayal, and buried under years of building my own life without them. They were strangers to me now, strangers who happened to share my DNA. I told them calmly that I would not be giving them any money. I explained that I had built a successful life without their support or approval, and I saw no reason to rescue them from the consequences of their own choices. They had chosen to believe Madison's lies, they had chosen to enable her addiction, and they had chosen to let me suffer in silence for over a decade rather than admit their mistakes. The meeting ended with Mom begging and Dad trying to appeal to my sense of family obligation. But I had learned the hard way that family is about more than blood relations. Family means standing by each other, believing in each other, and choosing love over convenience. My parents had failed at being family when it mattered most. I walked out of that house feeling lighter than I had in years, knowing that I had finally closed a chapter of my life that had been haunting me for far too long. 3 weeks after my visit to Columbus, my parents lost their house. According to the investigator I had kept on retainer, they moved into a low-income apartment complex on the outskirts of town. Dad's drinking had gotten worse since our meeting, and he had been hospitalized twice for alcohol-related health problems. Mom's diabetes was poorly controlled due to stress and inability to afford proper medical care. Madison had completed her 7th rehabilitation program, but relapsed again within 2 months. This time, my parents had no money left to pay for private treatment, so she was placed in a state-funded facility with a 6-month waiting list. She had burned bridges with every family member and friend who had previously tried to help her, leaving her completely alone with her addiction. The investigator also discovered something that provided me with the final piece of closure I needed. During a search of Madison's belongings before her latest rehab admission, authorities had found detailed journals documenting her drug use and criminal activities going back to high school. In these journals, Madison had written extensively about her jealousy toward me and her decision to frame me for elder abuse. The most revealing entries were from the weeks following Grandma Eleanor's death. Madison had written about watching our grandmother count money during our bank trips and realizing how much she must have saved over the years. When the will was read and I inherited $50,000, Madison's jealousy had turned into rage. She had spent days planning how to make our parents believe I had manipulated Grandma, practicing my handwriting and creating fake notes that would support her story. What Madison had not anticipated was how completely our parents would turn against me. She had expected them to confront me about the allegations, giving me a chance to defend myself and forcing her to provide more evidence. When they immediately packed my belongings and threw me out, Madison realized her lie had gone much further than she intended, but she was too deep into her addiction to find the courage to tell the truth. Reading those journal entries through my investigator's report was both vindicating and heartbreaking. I finally understood that Madison's actions had not been motivated by simple greed, but by a deep-seated jealousy and self-loathing that had been eating away at her for years. Her addiction had begun as a way to cope with feeling like the family disappointment, and framing me had been her desperate attempt to level the playing field between us. Understanding Madison's motivations did not make me forgive her actions, but it did help me find peace with the situation. I realized that her betrayal said more about her internal struggles than it did about our sisterly bond. She had been drowning in her own problems and had pulled me down with her rather than learning to swim on her own. 6 months after my parents lost their house, I received an unexpected phone call from a social worker in Columbus. Madison had overdosed in the state rehabilitation facility and was in critical condition at the local hospital. The social worker explained that Madison had listed me as her emergency contact years earlier and had never updated her paperwork. My parents were too distraught and financially strained to handle medical decisions, so the hospital needed to know if I would take responsibility for her care. I sat in my office looking out at the Chicago skyline, processing this information about my sister who had destroyed my family. For a moment, I considered driving to Columbus to see her, maybe even helping with her medical bills. But then I remembered standing on my parents' porch with my belongings scattered around me, remembered years of returned letters and missed birthdays, remembered watching my family choose lies over truth. I told the social worker politely but firmly that Madison was not my responsibility. I provided them with my parents' contact information and asked to be removed from any future emergency contact lists. The social worker seemed surprised by my response, but I had learned that taking care of yourself is not selfish when the people who should love you have repeatedly chosen to harm you instead. Madison survived the overdose, but suffered permanent heart damage that would affect her for the rest of her life. She was released from the hospital into a long-term care facility because my parents could not afford the specialized medical attention she required. The investigation into her overdose revealed that she had been trading sexual favors for drugs within the rehabilitation facility, highlighting how far her life had spiraled out of control. Meanwhile, my business continued thriving as I poured my energy into building something positive and meaningful. We expanded into a larger office space and hired 22 employees, many of whom had become like family to me. Marcus and I got engaged on my 34th birthday, and we began planning a wedding that would be filled with people who had chosen to love and support us. I also began speaking at conferences about entrepreneurship and overcoming personal challenges. While I never shared the specific details of my family situation publicly, I talked about the importance of building your own support system and learning to trust your own judgment even when others doubt you. These speaking engagements led to opportunities to mentor young business owners who were facing their own family and financial obstacles. The healing process was gradual and sometimes painful, but working with a therapist helped me understand that forgiveness does not require reconciliation. I could forgive my family for their mistakes without allowing them back into my life to hurt me again. I could feel compassion for Madison's struggles while maintaining firm boundaries about my own well-being. I learned that some relationships are meant to teach us lessons rather than last forever. My family had taught me resilience, independence, and the importance of surrounding myself with people who believe in my character and integrity. They had also shown me what kind of person I never wanted to become, someone who chooses comfortable lies over difficult truths, someone who enables destructive behavior in the name of love. 2 years after Madison's overdose, I received a letter from her directly. It was the first communication I had received from any family member since our meeting in their living room. The letter was written in shaky handwriting on hospital stationery, and Madison's words were simple but sincere. She took full responsibility for everything she had done, apologized for destroying our family, and expressed hope that someday I might find it in my heart to forgive her. I read the letter 3 times before putting it in a file with other documents related to my family situation. I felt sadness for the little girl who used to build snow forts with me, and I hoped Madison would find peace and recovery in whatever time she had left. But I also knew that forgiveness was a process that would happen on my timeline, not hers, and that healing did not require me to rebuild relationships that had caused me so much pain. The final lesson I learned from this experience was that sometimes the greatest act of love is walking away from people who consistently choose to hurt you. Setting boundaries is not cruel or selfish. It is necessary for your own mental health and personal growth. Family is not defined by blood relations, but by the people who show up for you when life gets difficult, who believe in your character when others doubt you, and who celebrate your successes without jealousy or resentment. Today, I am surrounded by a chosen family of friends, colleagues, and loved ones who have proven their loyalty through their actions rather than their words. Marcus and I built a beautiful life together, and my business has grown beyond my wildest dreams. I am proud of the woman I became through adversity, and I am grateful for the strength I discovered when I had no choice but to rely on myself. The family that threw me away all those years ago gave me the greatest gift they could have given, even though it was not their intention. They forced me to become independent, resilient, and discerning about who deserves a place in my life. They taught me that my worth is not determined by other people's opinions of me, but by my own actions and integrity. As I finish telling this story, I want to ask those of you who have experienced family betrayal or estrangement, how did you find the strength to rebuild your life after people you trusted let you down? Please share your experiences in the comments below because your stories might help someone else who is facing similar challenges. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like, subscribe to this channel for more real-life family drama, and share this video with anyone who might need to hear that they can overcome family betrayal and build something beautiful from the ashes. Remember that your value as a person is not determined by how others treat you, but by how you choose to treat yourself and others. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is protect your own peace and let other people face the consequences of their choices. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it brings you some comfort if you are dealing with your own family struggles. You are stronger than you know, and you deserve relationships built on truth, respect, and genuine love.